right, it is 6 o'clock, and I don't see any stragglers, or if there are, then too bad for them. We're setting some more chairs up for everyone. But welcome to the final and best packed lecture of the DCL100 lecture series. And this has been great. We've had 3 lectures so far, and almost they will all be on YouTube at some point. The second and third are on YouTube. The first I kind of screwed up on videoing, but we're working on that. So if you miss it, or you have any, Karen spills some gems that you want to make sure you can go back and look at later, we're recording it, and you'll be able to go back and look at them later. So of course, this is part of the Deep Creek Lake Centennial, and we're doing stuff year-round. We wanted to have something happening every month, and so far we're successful. And next month we've got a lot of great stuff coming up. We've got team trivia nights every Thursday at ACES, so you can test your Deep Creek Lake knowledge and win some amazing prizes every Thursday. It's free to enter, and food and drink will be available. The voice of Garrett County, Connor Norman, will be running the trivia nights there. We've got a picture party on April 27th, I believe, also at ACES, and that will be an opportunity for you to bring in your pictures, old things, get them digitized, and then we can share those memories with everyone. Then we'll also have a curated group of pictures and stuff that will be kind of playing on a slideshow there as well. And then on the 29th of April, we've got Amazing Grazing, the Taste of Garrett County, making its much anticipated and much demanded return. We're partnering with Stage West. They are really the primary entity behind that, but we're helping raise awareness of that. And of course, if you're not familiar, is an event where all of the major restaurants of Garrett County and Deep Creek Lake come together. They offer free food. You buy a ticket, you pay one price, and then you get to sample all of the amazing food that we have to offer in the area. So that's just April. May, we've got a lot of great stuff coming up. We've got an adventure challenge coming up at the end of May. June is what we're calling Deep Creek Lake Day on the 21st. We've got free entry to Deep Creek Lake State Park, a recreation fair where there'll be free rentals of paddle boards and other water equipment. That's being sponsored by the health department. And then of course the Lions Club boat parade on the lake. Our big event for the year is the Deep Creek Lake Birthday Bash, 100th Birthday Bash. That's July 19th at the fairgrounds. That's going to be a free or very low entry event with vendors, bands, a very special grand finale that's never been seen in Garrett County before. Top secret, but you don't want to miss that. And then of course a gala on August 23rd with a Roaring Twenties theme. So lots of great stuff. I mean, I only mentioned a few things. There's stuff every month. Grab a brochure. And speaking of all that stuff over there, we've got an entry to win, some great swag over there. Just drop your name and email in that entry box. You can buy garden flags and bunting there. I'll be available for you to buy some of that stuff. And for tonight's theme of all of our static display, we've got some really amazing old maps of Garrett County and the lake that you can check out at your leisure. And the big lake map will be available, tailor-made for people to come in and look at in the next month or so once we get it kind of cleaned up. So if you wanted to see that and look at that in more detail, grab one of these brochures, shoot us an email, and I'll let you know when that's available. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Karen Myers to talk about waterfront homefront sites through the decades.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I hope I don't disappoint you, but first I want to thank some people who helped me, because this has been, I thought I knew a lot about Garrett County real estate and Deep Creek Lake real estate. I've lived the past 50 years, but researching the previous 50 years has been a challenge. Anyway, my thanks to Bill Bittinger and Don Lindsay. They're both clerks of court, one for Allegheny County, one for Garrett County. So the old deeds do not state the consideration or the price paid. So you have to figure out, you have to calculate the documentary stamps that are there. So Bill provided me with a chart of the documentary stamp tax rate through the years, and then Don's staff verified the method to calculate. It can all be a bit confusing, so these might not be exact numbers, but they're going to get close anyway. And then the thing that made it more confusing, in 1968, the documentary stamp tax rate in Maryland went from $1.10 per thousand to $1.10 per 500. So then, you had to multiply it by 2. But anyway, so we got through that part. Then Phil Smith at the Garrett County Assessment Office and Craig Umble from the Health Department gave me some additional info. Then I interviewed Morgan France and Rich Skipper, our local surveyors, who helped me find some plats and find some things. And then Wendell Beitzel, who's here tonight, refreshed my memory on the Deep Creek sewer system. And then I had Chris Jones and Rachel Hanlon who helped me with the slides because I'm not very good at technology. Some of the slides aren't real clear, but they're we'll work through them because it helps get the message across. And again, I said, don't take away any exact numbers. Well, I'll tell you when they are exact. But I looked through a lot of deeds and my eyes got a little blurry. But you're going to definitely see a trend through the 100 years. I now realize that there's so much more info there on a wider range, but that's a later time. So this evening is just concentrating on waterfront lots, and I'm more nervous because my grandsons and their friends are in attendance tonight, and they know that I have high expectations for their work. So I hope I don't disappoint them or bore them or you. So let's get started and see if I can figure it out. So what this is, it's very hard to read. This is part of the military lot map, and I have a copy of it against the wall over there, but it reflects the land grants and the military lots in Garrett County. I didn't want to steal anything from Chris Nichols' previous lecture because he talked about the land before the lake, but it's important, I think, to know the history. So in 1777, the Maryland General Assembly passed an act for recruiting the quota of troops needed for the American Army. And they needed to furnish them with clothing and other necessities. So here's what the act said. Every effective recruit is to receive, besides the continental allowances, a bounty of $40, a pair of shoes, a pair of stockings, and at the expiration of his term, provided he shall not desert from the Army, 50 acres of land to be procured and laid off as aforesaid to him or his representative. I presume if he died, then his representative could get it. So when they said go west, young man, in those days, that was us. We were the West. This is as far as they were going. So our current tax maps still show those military lot numbers, and I brought my set of, and I'm old-fashioned. I'm the only realtor around that still has the tax maps that I pay to rent every year, but I love them. So anyhow, you can look and see the numbers that are on there. So then I wanted to just go, so here we have a little bit of color. So the blue is just below an area called Locust Tree Bottom. And I wanted to point that out to you because when you look back in the old deeds in the McHenry area, many of them will start or corner at some place on Locust Tree Bottom. So there that is. That was a land grant before. And then the stream that's in blue, the stream that's right below that is called Buffalo Marsh Run. So if you want to know more about the possible background story on the buffaloes, I recommend that you purchase and read Ed King's book, The Founders, Book 1, because there's a chapter in there about that that's pretty interesting. So again, this one's pretty hard to read, and I think Chris talked about it, but that showed the land parcels before the lake was flooded. Something I wanted to point out with this is that when the land was acquired by Eastern Land Corporation for construction of this hydroelectric dam, it was required that the entire parcel be purchased, not just the area that was going to be flooded. So, and because of that policy, then Eastern Land Corp, that was later known as Youghiogheny Electric or Penelec, was encouraged strongly or forced to sell its excess land not needed for operation of the facility. However, before that big sale in 1945, Eastern Land Corp had many other conveyances, and I found another one to be very interesting, and I'm going to share it with you in a little bit, in the southern end of the lake at Turkey Neck. So, well, now let's set the stage. 1925, the average income was $5,425, as reported by the IRS, that represented people who had incomes high enough to submit a return. So there were probably a lot of people who didn't submit a return, but anyhow, that's what they had. So they also report that $5,425 in 1925 had the same buying power as about $99,000 in 2024. Regarding cars and automobiles, by 1925, personal car ownership was the norm, and they had prices between $1,000 and $3,000, although the Ford Model T touring car had come down to just $260. So the roaring 20s, it symbolized a period of excess in consumerism. People were spending freely. There was a shift in social norms, particularly with the rise of the flappers, symbolizing the increased female independence. And speaking of female independence, I looked this up. The 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, giving women the right to vote. But Maryland didn't actually, we had the right in 1920 because it was ratification of the Constitution. But Maryland didn't technically approve it until 1941. Just a little thing. So jazz music, it was perfect. That dominated nightlife in major cities. And prohibition was in full swing, which meant that we had speakeasies and bootlegging, and I could tell you stories that I've heard about that, but then we would never get through the next 100 years. So we'll come to some of the other events. So there was a tough decade ahead of them, just around the corner, the Great Depression, but they didn't know that yet in 1925. They were riding high, and I can associate with that because it's about the way we felt, or many of us felt, in 2004 to 2006. We thought we were doing well, we couldn't do anything wrong, and then the Great Recession hit. So anyway, electricity, I thought you'd be interested to know this. In 1925, only 50% of the homes in our entire country had electricity. And in 1936, so this is 11 years after the dam, 75% of the farms in Pennsylvania and Garrett County did not have electricity. So the Rural Electrification Act in 1930 enabled the Somerset Rural Electric Cooperative to extend service into northern Garrett County. And I kind of know that because on our farm, that's who we paid our electric bill to, and we read our own meters and so forth, but I knew that Somerset was there, but I'm thinking, wow, they didn't have electricity. So by 1945, though, 85% of the homes had electricity, and by 1960, 99.9%. So you're always going to have a few who want to live off the grid. So when we talk about early cabins, think rustic and no electricity. I remember Joe Franklin telling a story about, and it was kind of like, as a little kid, they were imagining giants coming down Glendale Road, and it was the electric poles that were being placed. And I'm thinking he must have been about 7 or so, because he was born in 1933. But anyway, life was definitely not real easy in 25, especially compared to our standards today. So, here's the takeaways. A lakefront lot at Deep Creek Lake cost about $500. About 9% of the average gross income. Rent was $75 a month, so it would have required 6.5 months of rent. New houses were $11,600. A lake lot represented 4.3% of the cost of a new house. And then remember, and I've heard some stories about this, Deep Creek Lake was an artificial lake. And a lot of people said, it is never going to be anything. It's an artificial lake. What do you think? So, and there was no history of lake levels or lake activity. And according to Eric Knoll, who told us about fish, he said there weren't any fish in the lake then either. I think there are people who disagree, but anyway, that's what he told us a few weeks ago. So now we're going to get familiar with Garrett County's boundaries. So this is a map of the election districts. And the next slide shows, I've highlighted the election districts that comprise the lake area. So you can see the lake in the center. And we have election districts 1, 6, 7, 10, and 14-1. So there are dissimilarities within each of those districts, and the reason I'm telling you about this is think a bit about Swanton. Swanton is number 1 right here. So it goes from right here at the Glendale Bridge all the way to the Potomac River right here. So there's not much in common with down this area and the lake. And I think our tax assessors were having a hard time at some point in time trying to figure out how to match up the properties. So in July 1979, Taxing District 18 was created. It's not an election district, it's a taxing district, but enabled those who were responsible to make the tax assessments to compare similar properties. For instance, they could compare a lakefront to a lakefront, a lake access to a lake access, something with a lake view, that sort of thing. So in our real estate work, I typically search for District 18 when I'm looking to see what's happening in the lake area. So that was an orientation. So now the lake was completed in 1925, and beginning in 1929, we have the Depression. But we also have some other things. So here is the first plat that I found. This was recorded by McIntyre. It was recorded the end of June 1928. Things were still going good, no depression yet. So from 1928 to 1933, the lots there sold for $145 to $300. So if you look right here, the state road, that state road is Route 219. And this plat, let's see, okay, so this plat goes on down here to another section because this is Deep Creek Lake. So as it turns out, again, I was digging in all these deeds. I'm looking at the lot numbers, and I'm seeing lots 29, 30, 31, 32, and I'm like, that seems familiar. And I double checked. And of course, my brother and I, in 2003, bought a property that had 3 lots, 29, 30, and 31, from this very subdivision. And we paid $675,000. So that was $227,500 each. When they were originally sold, that group of 5 lots that had those 3 in it went for $500, or essentially $100 each. So there you go. So this subdivision is in the area of Billsborough, directly across from the Billsborough showroom, where we ended up building those 3 little log cabins. So the next one is Bars Lakeview. So some things that were interesting here to me. This says State Road to Oakland. Okay, I can figure that out. That's 219. Then this one says Road to Mansville. So anyway, I finally realized that's this road, and that's Rock Lodge Road. So that one was recorded July the 1st, 1929. And in the 5-year period from 26 to 31, those generally sold around $500. And let's see. So this one is Lakeside Development. It's on Marsh Hill Road. But now let's go to this next one. So here's one, Monte Vista. Monte Vista was the new subdivision in 1934. It was platted by a group from Baltimore calling themselves the Monte Vista Corporation. And from 1934 to 38, they sold about 9.5 lots at prices ranging from $500 to $1,000 for a single lot and $1,500 for 2 lots. So when I began my research, I actually started with one of the Monte Vista deeds because my friend Susan had talked about her grandparents choosing the lot. Her father was an architect from Wheeling, and her daughter and son-in-law, Travis and Lauren, now own that. So here we have the lots that were sold. They're outlined in blue, and the one with all of the color around it. Oops, I did the wrong thing. Here we go. This is the one that is Lauren and Travis's, and the kids, wherever they went. There they are. So that's where they are right now. So, and that deed that I found had recording stamps that showed it sold for $800. I think they told you something else, but anyhow, that's what the deed shows. So what was interesting, I didn't find any other sales from that corporation after 1938. So I did a little more research and I went back, and then I found that 10 years later, in 1948, the remaining property, everything else that is there, other than those that are outlined in blue, was transferred by the sheriff of Garrett County to Walter Dawson and Richard McComas for $420 in back taxes. And the back taxes were for the years 42, 43, 44, and 45. And so then you can go down a hole digging out all these deeds from Dawson and McComas, but at any rate. So there are a lot of other subdivision names too. We had the Harrison Miller subdivision on Deep Creek Drive, a lot of names, Earl K. Harvey out of Harvey's Peninsula, Richard McComas, Brant, May, Thayer, Glaufeld, it just goes on and on. So this is the one that I said is interesting. So this is Turkey Neck Estates. And when I looked at that, I thought, this can't be right. And so then I called, that's why I called Morgan, because I said, Morgan, I think you probably know more about this. And he says, well, not so much, but he talked to me for a while. So we have that, and then that was some of the interior lots. So to me, I thought I knew Turkey Neck kind of well, and I'm like, it doesn't have that many houses there. So I looked up some more information. And it's amazing what you can find that's public record. So here we have that so this is April 16th, 1936. Eastern Land Corporation agreed, and this is not a deed that's recorded, but it was an agreement that was recorded. So it was that they were agreeing, Eastern Land Corporation, to sell 2 tracts of land that were a little over 1,600 acres. The parties of the second part, so their names are Philip Weems, Caleb Winslow, Enoch Gary, Swepson Earl, and Eugene Spalding. They were from Anne Arundel County, Harford County, Ridgewood, New Jersey. They weren't really from here, but they were agreeing to buy it for $38,000. And the payment terms were, on that day, they had to give them $1,750, 1st of July, $250, and then at the 1st of January, the next 2 years, $1,500 each, and then at the 1st of January 39, the final $33,000. And it was agreed there'd be no interest if paid as agreed. So on the very same day, and it looked like they were acknowledging that all parties knew this, those parties of the second part, the names I read to you, had another agreement, and this was with 2 people from Allegheny County, Maryland, Harold Mumma and Cyrus Bowers. And they were purchasing the second tract. The second tract was 400 and some acres. So think about this. The first guys were purchasing 1,600 for $38,000. They're selling just a little over 400 for $50,000 on the same day. Now, they're not getting all their money at once. So their payment terms were, did I get, okay, let's go to the next quote. Okay, so their payments were listed above, $3,000, $5,000, and then $5,000 every year until the full sum of $50,000 was paid. And they had provisions to pay to the bank in Cumberland to offset a loan and all that kind of thing. And as big in these agreements was no title or interest in the artificial, remember that artificial lake or pond that is used for industrial purposes. Water therein varies in the rise and fall according to the amount of water used and the rainfall. So they were, they didn't really know whether there was going to be much water in the lake or not all the time, so there was a chance that they were taking. The Moomaw plan for development out at Turkey Neck included a sailing club and clubhouse. That's what we now know of as the Yacht Club at Turkey Neck or the Deep Creek Sailing Association. A par 3 golf course. Morgan told me that was in the area where Back Bay is, and other recreational facilities. And anyway, I believe that Mr. Muma and his partner, Mr. Bowers, were men of vision. And, you know, a lot of us are enjoying some of that right now. So let's talk about the cost of living in this era, 33 to 35. These were hard times. My parents were actually born in 1933 and 1935, so I got to hear a lot of those stories. But we're looking at a new house at just under $6,000, your average income of $1,555 a year. Let's look here. Eggs are 16 cents a dozen. In 1935, it was really felt that the cost of living was unaffordable. And that depression did not end until the war machine started up in 1941. And so it just made it harder for Americans to get by. I did find an article where it talked about a lady was featured in a magazine, and her goal was to feed her family by spending just $1 a day. So they had some hard times. So now we'll look. So from this book, again, I keep stealing things from Ed's book, but this was something that was taken from the newsletter of the Deep Creek Lake Association, which is the predecessor of our Property Owners Association of Deep Creek Lake. And a couple things, it's too hard for you to read, so I'm going to tell you the things that I wanted to point out. At that time, and this was in 1938, there were 139 private cottages, plus 80 cottages for rent. Even then, they distinguished between the private and the rental. There was one camp, and there were 7 temporary camps. Now here's the interesting part. There were 81 sanitary privies. I don't know if those kids are back there. They probably don't know what a privy is. There they are. You know what a privy is? It's an outhouse. We'll have to explain that to you. So, and there's 52 unsanitary privies. So when I read that in Ed's book, I'm like, what in the world is an unsanitary privy? And so I Googled it, and there's a whole explanation there. You can learn a lot about it. And there were 81 flush toilets. So that takes me back to explain that when these subdivisions began in 1928, there were no sanitary regulations, or if there were none that were permitted or enforced, okay? So they just set the survey markers, and they had a building lot with a road, ingress and egress. And I remember back in the mid-1950s, amazingly, we had I think our first sanitarian. His name was Charlie Miller. He was from Friendsville. And I knew of him because his wife was actually, her name was Jenny. She was my first grade teacher, and turned out, it's a small town in Friendsville, she was my dad's first grade teacher too. But anyway, Charlie was the sanitarian. He issued permits for septic systems, but property owners did their own perk testing. So that meant that 99% of the properties tested passed because they all did it themselves. I'll pick up this story again when I get about 1970 because things change a little bit. Also in my research, I would read some deeds, with my eyes getting blurry, and it would refer to a subdivision name. So then I would go back and try deeds on Marsh Hill, then Skipper's Point. They did something called Yacht River Estates, and then they developed the area we know as Stockslager Road, with prices ranging from $38.50 to $49.50. So, oh, I forgot. Here's what you could get with a house back in 1955. So now we're at 1965. Our average income is $6,500, a new car about $2,600, home at $13,600. Again, the nice lots on the lake would consume an entire year's average income, or about half the cost of a home. Comparing with a car purchase, a lot was now at least twice the price of a car. Remember back a couple decades ago, it was half the price of a car. Eggs are now 53 cents. It's important. So moving through the 60s up to 1975 or so, the Smiths are ranging from 10 to 37.4. Stockslagers are from 12 to 25. And the Harveys, I think, are running out of inventory. I'm seeing fewer and fewer deeds. and they were maintaining about 6,600. So I told you we'd come back to 1970 about like the health department and so forth, the environmental health department. So around 1970, there were more stringent regulations imposed for on-site individual septic systems. And home sites had to be pre-evaluated, or what we call pre-perked and approved before they could be sold. So that meant that the property owners or developers often had to make the lots larger in order to be approved, or they had some areas that were simply not suitable for on-site septics. Maybe it was too rocky, too wet, so anyway, prices had to go up because of that too. So in 1975, here we go. Average income has doubled to $12,686. A new house is $48,000. New cars $3,800. Eggs are at 84 cents. Although the income is up to nearly $13,000, lakefront lots have increased well into the $20,000 to $35,000 range. So now it takes at least 2 years' income to offset the cost of a lakefront lot, or nearly the cost of a brand new house. As far as cars, it's 5 to 7 times the cost of a car to be able to buy a lot here. It's very difficult for an average income earner to afford even the purchase of a home site in Deep Creek Lake. I remember something else in the early 70s. We experienced a drastic energy shortage and we had very high prices. Vacation driving was hampered and vacationing was cut back, and then we started building houses with energy saving features in mind. But, well, I won't go. If I go on tangents, we'll never get out of here, so let's stop with that. So something else that 1985 or 1975 brings to Deep Creek Lake is the zoning ordinance. The lake was approaching 50 years of age. It was recognized that a uniform system of rules and regulations would be superior to having different rules for different communities all around the lake. And it was not taken lightly, and I think this committee worked for at least 4 years until its adoption was July the 1st, 1975. So, and my recollection is that some of the committee members were Bill Sisler, Johnny Marple, General Joe Franklin, Bill's dad, and Dr. Bill Savage. Then we had also some recognition. So in 1979, here we're featured in Snow Track magazine, Garrett County, Maryland snowmobiling secret. There's the whole article. We also have, by 1975, we have 3 condominium projects. 4 Hoop Hole, Red Run, and Will-o'-the-Wisp. So back to a lot of those members that were on the committee to develop the zoning ordinance and business people who were concerned. There was, by the locals, there was some feeling that there was evidence and risk of sewage contaminated water in Deep Creek Lake. And it was from failing septic systems, because remember, we had these small lots with probably not good septic systems in it. They were primitive systems. Now we were known as Maryland's best kept secret. But we were going to get a huge black mark that wouldn't do us any good if we had septic contaminated water. So an engineering firm from Baltimore first designed something, a vacuum sewer system. That system was opposed by Wendell and Edgar Harmon because they'd investigated mountainous communities that had a vacuum system and learned that it didn't work there. It did work down at Ocean Pines in Ocean City, or near Ocean City, where the land is level. So anyway, the system was redesigned to be a pressure sewer system. Wendell was in charge at the Sanitary Commission at that time, applied for grants. And when this started, the cost per ERU, the homeowner was set at $800. And I remember that $800 could be paid over 40 years. And I think that meant we paid $79.50 a year. But as properties sold, then gradually those were all paid off. So anyway, continuing with that, contracts were awarded and they were given notice to proceed. But then we had a glitch. So The Property Owners Association of Deep Creek filed suit, and a judge in Hagerstown stopped the progress. They had to go through a whole system. The Sanitary Commission was recreated, or the Sanitary District was recreated by the commissioners. They had a public hearing, and finally, the commissioners involved Ernie Gregg, John Brasky, and Larry Groves voted 2-1 in favor of proceeding with the public sewer system. So the delay that was caused because of all that cost them an additional $1.7 million, but because 6 of the 8 contractors filed delay claims because they were delayed during the suit. Anyway, this system was operational in 1984 to 85, and things start changing then. From my perspective, the zoning ordinance that was adopted in 1975, thank you, didn't have much impact on me because we were still relying on individual septic system. So it didn't matter whether you had 4 acres of town center property or not, because if you couldn't put in a septic system, you couldn't build condos, or you couldn't do a restaurant, or you couldn't do anything. So developers were really just regulated by the health department. Zoning was an afterthought. I never paid any attention to the zoning ordinance until the sewer system was enacted. So after the sewer system, then we started paying attention to zoning. And I remember doing some planning with architects and so forth, and in fact, this was the property that now became the fort. So the area where Pine Lodge is, and the fun zone and all that sort of thing, that area at that time was zoned town center, and it could have had 14 residential units per acre. I looked at this map and I'm like, ooh, there's nothing but roofs on this. And so we talked to the planning commission, and the zoning ordinance was amended. So they reduced that after a few years down to 9 units per acre, and that's typically what we see in the town center areas now. So, well, I'm looking for something, but we'll find it in a minute. So, the slide I'm looking for is misplaced. But what I want to talk about is the other thing that was taking place after we got the sewer system. It was Route 48 that then became Interstate 68. It actually took 25 years. Started with the Cumberland Bypass Bridge in 1965, went on to Frostburg, opened from Garrett County to West Virginia in 1973, but the last section between Hancock and Cumberland was built in 87 to 91. So this road was a major factor in the desirability of having a vacation home or second home at Deep Creek Lake. On the old Route 40, and I wasn't driving it, but I rode it. It was normal to take 5.5 to 6 hours to get to Baltimore, Washington. When the entirety of 48 was opened and it became I-68, the drive to those metropolitan areas of Baltimore, Washington, Northern Virginia, 3 hours. Perfect. Studies have shown that primary vacation home destinations need to be at least 2 hours from their primary home and not more than 4 hours. So now we have 5 of the wealthiest counties in the country less than 3 hours away. And we have four-season recreation, with Wisp Resort being here, adding to the desirability, and I showed you about that snowmobiling coverage. So we began to advertise, some of us, in the metropolitan areas, and so here's just a couple of the ads that kind of work. Here was the slide I was looking for about Interstate 68. It didn't come quickly, but from 1965 to 1991, finally, it happened. Then we have 1985, cost of living. Americans are doing much better. Average income is now over $23,000 a year. It doubled again. The median price is for new homes up to $82,500. Dozen eggs are 80 cents. It's down a little bit. Lakefront lots are now being over $100,000 and up to $145,000. That means it takes 5 years of income to buy one of those lots. Another way of looking at it is that a lakefront lot now is about 1 3/4 times the cost of a new home, so, or a primary home. So it's certainly no longer affordable, and I said that a decade or two ago, for the average income earner to enjoy a lakefront lot. Here. Oh, I found, we started doing these little magazines. So this was summer of '85. This is when we did them on newsprint, and we had some prices. This house is lakefront house right near the end of Paradise Point, $450,000. Here were, these are some things of the out of the times. And then we have Pin Cove. So Pin Cove, that's one of the properties that came from the Smith family, remember? And here's the prices. I remember this lot right here, lot number 10, out here in the corner. Let's see, 8, 7, 8, 9, 10, yeah, that lot right there. So it was priced at $85,000. It ended up selling at $88,000. At the time, I think it was the highest priced lot on the water, but it had, you know, it did have a look. Okay, then we're moving on a little bit into, this is 1987. So we have two Great Lake locations. We have Sandy Beach and Blakesley. Now, if we go back to Sandy Beach, I have a little story. If I got the slide, let's see. I'll have to just tell you about it. Because, okay, here's the story. Smiley and Jeff Bell were really creative. And I showed you earlier that back in 1936, the deal that they did with the land from Eastern Land Corporation, and it was kind of a development deal to the Mumas. So Smiley and Jeff wanted to develop this area, it's Sandy Beach. And there were two owners involved. One was the Smith family, Hergen Farm, and the other was Theodore Stockslager. So I don't know whether they went to the banks or not, but they needed $900,000 to purchase this part of the majority of the lakefront, and this one was $295,000. Stockslager was willing to take a $50,000 down payment and be paid over time. Smith said, no, we want the whole thing. So they did a pre-sale program, and I guess I don't have it here, but I'm going to remember it. So the pre-sale program basically was, they wanted to sell, and I think it was 24 lots at half price to them. That was $55,000. And so several of us bought those. And there was one big day of closing in September of that year. And all of the pre-sale lots, we closed with cash at T.R. Jane's office. And they used that cash on the very same day to pay this Hergen partnership and Mr. Stockslager what they had to pay there. It was a beautiful thing all the way around, but it was a very creative way of doing it. So again here, this is 89 World Whitewater Championships. We got a little more recognition from that. Here we have more townhomes, the Willows, Ski Harbor. So something that was happening with development then, when we had the sewer system, the county had a rule that if you were a landowner and you bought the sewer taps, you had to use them in 2 years. So that forced all of this quick development. And finally, we talked to them and said, hey, don't make us keep pushing this out because we're building it faster than they really wanted. And so that's when they came up with that inactive sewer ERU fee. Okay, 1995. We're still going up. Let's see, eggs are at 87 cents a dozen. Here's a comparison, 1975 to 2015. A new house went from $48,000 to $270,000. A new car from $3,800 to $31,000. Eggs, 84 cents a dozen to $2.08 a dozen. Prices went up during that time. So now we have, in 1993, we had something, Garrett County was the second county to go online with a new MLS system that was called the Metropolitan Regional Information System, MRIS. So because of that, they went on in 1993, we have these statistics. So in 1999, the high and low lakefront lot price range, $50,000 was the low. That was in Green Glade. We all know what the water depth is there. And the high price was one of the lots at Blakesley out on the point, shown right there, and that was at $325,000. In that period, there were 34 waterfront sales in that 7-year period. Then we go to the next one, 2000, 2004. The range was $50,000 to $625,000. Anyway, in 2002, here you've got this lot at Paradise Point. It had that little cabin on it, sold for $525,000. Then we get into 2010 to 2014 and 2005 to 2009. So let's talk about kind of the 20-year period of time. From 2005 up, the reserve at Holy Cross really took over. And we had the highest price lot being $1,003,000. Then, 2010 to 2014, again, we had a lot of sales at the reserve, but the highest price lot then was $1,050,000. So it had come down a little bit. Well, remember, we had the Great Recession of 2008. That did affect that price just a little bit. We're finishing up. So again, most of those sales were at the reserve at Holy Cross, but coming on, we had one that was at Smith Point for $715,000. And then we are, from 2020 to 2024, 16 of the 35 waterfront sites that were over $500,000 were 1,000 acres. Here's the record one. This sold for $10,500,000 July of 2022. But it's more than a lot. I mean, 241 acres was 1,600 feet of lakefront. So when I did stats, I threw out that one because I thought that just doesn't really compute. So here's what you got for a chart. To start this off, I did 70 years because you'll see when we have 100 years, it kind of goes off the top. But we stayed pretty low right here in that 100 to 500 range, then 500 to 1,000. We just kept going up a little bit. And then this is when we're starting to get into Penn Cove, going up here. Next slide. So again, that's showing this starting here, but then it just takes off like crazy. There's that $1,003,000 in 08, comes down to $1,050,000 in 2013, $1,055,000 last year, $1,750,000. Now that's not every lot, I'm just talking about the highest price ones. So, I'm going to wrap up now. This presentation has only been about waterfront land because it just gets too involved to start talking about houses and multifamily. There are too many variables, so you can't really compare. And I was thinking about trying to compare homes, but even if you go back in the 30s or 40s, there are just so many variations. At that time, remember, they built what they called cabins or camps. And I remember listing one back around 1970, and I actually offered it as a rental, and I described it as rustic. And we know that realtors are guilty of embellishing sometimes. So anyhow, this is what rustic meant then. There were open studs on the interior. There was no insulation, there was no paneling, there was no sheetrock. There were nails, you hung your coat or you hung your pots and pans on the nails. There was no central heat or air conditioning. There was a very small metal shower, about 3 by 3 in the bathroom, and of course there was only one bathroom no matter how many bedrooms you had. Sounds tough. Yeah. So there are a lot more ways to look at our real estate market. If we had the time and energy, I'd show you how the focus has gradually shifted from lakefront to lake access, to lake view, to slope access. And it's interesting, I have had people call me, and I'm sure those of you in the real estate business have as well. They'll call me and say, well, we think we want to sell our house that's near Deep Creek Lake, and after you talk to them for a few minutes, you realize they're talking about a house that's east of Grantsville, and in their mind, it's still near Deep Creek Lake. So it's nearer than Hagerstown and So here's another thing I thought was interesting. I pulled a lot of this stuff off the internet. $100 in 1925, they said, was worth almost $1,800 in 2024. But you certainly can't buy a lot for that now. And just in case you wanted to compare the price, there you go. From 22 cents, and I went down to Shop and Save this afternoon, and it was $3.99. Thank you very much. Yeah, if there are a few questions, we can take a few questions, and I'll try to answer, or there are other experts in the room who would know the answers probably better than I. No questions?
Well, there should be one. Are there any lots of Deep Creek Lake for sale? That's ocean.
Well, that's interesting, because a check of our MLS system 2 days ago showed that the only thing showing that's unimproved in the lake area is out at Hazelhurst, and I think Sean might have it listed out there. So, yeah, there's very little, there is no inventory right now. This is the listing season. A few will probably come up. Mostly now, though, you're going to find where you're going to need to buy a lot with an older house on it, tear it down, and start over, because there's just very little left. Yes, Michael?
Do you know what's the history of the real estate business here, like when the market and brokerages started happening, as opposed to just for sale by owner? When did that business really come about? And do we know anything about the first listed properties?
I don't know much about it. I know a little bit about it. Ed King would talk to me at times about it. There was a man by the name of Bill Castile who did a fair amount of real estate work, and I think he may have bought his cabin from him. So, and then really, Garrettland, I think, was probably the first company that really took off. Oh, Susan, so good to see you, but like my little story with Jeff was fun. And then A&A came around in 1985.
Was Garrettland in the 60s or something?
Garrettland was probably, I think Archie Thayer had started it, so that was in the 60s. And he was involved in both Four Hoop Hole South and Sky Valley. So they had those new projects that came on. There was a time that my picture was a dartboard in their office. That's just the way it goes. But I'm still here. Yes?
Mary, can you tell us anything about what's under the water? What was here before the lake got flooded?
Well, Chris would know that, but it mostly was farmland.
Yes.
It was mostly farmland and timberland. I mean, the timber business was really very, very good in 1924-25 because they were cutting down all the trees and hauling them out.
I heard stories there's still a bridge somewhere and some roads and different things now.
Come see my, well, I'll put you to my lecture online, you can check it out. Yeah.
Yeah, Chris did one, and I need to go online, or else we need to get him to repeat it, because I like it in person better than looking online, but anyway. Is that it? Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
very
thanks,
much.
Thank you, Mayor Connor, for space and IT support for this. This really makes it happen. And thanks to all of you for coming. So I hope to see you all throughout April and the rest of the year, and for a great celebration of the centennial.
And don't forget to check out the display.
Check out cool stuff over there.